I'm so excited today to have Bill Blankschaen on the podcast. Bill is the founder and chief story architect of StoryBuilders, a creative team of storytellers who share his passion for helping people live a story worth telling and serving them with excellence in genuine, high trust relationships. StoryBuilders tell stories that make the world a better place by creating compelling books and learning experiences that turn ideas into greater impact, influence, and income. A New York Times bestselling writer, Bill and his team work with a variety of influencers like John Maxwell and Maxwell Leadership, Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank, Lewis Howes, Michael Hyatt with Full Focus, Rory and AJ Vaden, Zig Ziglar and family, Jeff Allen, Stu McLaren, entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, business coaches, consultants, political figures. I could keep going. The books, resources, and experiences they have created have already impacted millions of people, and they are just getting started. Bill, I'm so glad you're here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for being on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to it as well. It's not just because you have lots of books behind you either. I love books, obviously, but that's not all. I'm looking forward to talking.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
Bill, I would love for us to start with you sharing a little bit of your story with our listeners, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
Boy, that's a great question. It's hard to tell when leadership begins, right? I'll tell you how my love for story began, which has really driven my leadership development. I mean, as a boy, I was the one always, reading the breakfast cereal box 12 times every morning. Same box. I just kept reading it and reading it again because I loved reading. And so I would just, like the books behind you, I would suck up books. And I thought everybody was like that. I just thought everybody loves to read like that. They can do it. And it took me many years to realize that no, I was different. Not that everybody can't read, but I was specially gifted and wired to be able to absorb just a lot of information quickly and then to communicate it as well in written form. So I always thought I was supposed to be a writer and a storyteller. My went to college, majored in English and history, right? How to tell stories and what are the stories, that we're telling. So in those kind of things, and then, did what I think a lot of people do as they enter adulthood, right? They've got responsibilities, they've got things to do, they've got to pay the bills, they've got family coming into the picture. And I went into education because of that. And actually was a pastor for a couple of years in there as well, overlapping things, and went to education, helped start a private school in Northeast Ohio. And led that for a dozen years, and that's where I learned a lot about leadership. When you're in the nonprofit space, the ministry space, you're dealing with white collar volunteers, essentially. Volunteer mentality, yet well educated, working with kids, working with families, teachers, curriculum, and all that kind of thing. That's where I learned a lot about leadership. Had a great mentor there at the school who guided me through that as well. But then there came a time where I really felt like my calling within kept stirring to be a writer, to be a storyteller, and recognizing that I simply wasn't doing that. I was doing good work and leading a good organization, helping a lot of people. And it made it even more challenging that everybody kept telling me, you're doing great work, you're helping us, this is wonderful. Because that's who you are, right? And so my identity really became to be shaped by that. But finally just reached the place where I had to realize only I can fulfill the calling that I have in my heart. Only I can be that writer. No one else can do that for me, but someone else could lead this organization. So I stepped away from the organization, transitioned out of there. And in one day, my wife and I both our income went to zero. So we had 6 kids, no income. We went a year in that. But I was doing what I love to do, diving into storytelling and writing and learning and all these things. And now 12, 13 years later, StoryBuilders came out of that. And now I get to do what I love to do every single day. and help a lot of people to in that process.
I love that story because I think if I had talked to you 30 years ago, you would have had no idea.
Sure. Yeah.
There's so many winds and turns and curves and the unexpected. And that is so often the way it works with the high capacity, high performing leaders that I talk with.
Yeah. Not only would I have had no idea at that time, I didn't even know it was possible. Right. It wasn't even a thing for me. Right. I had no idea that anything. And so I think a lot of one of the things I've learned is that when we keep moving forward, I have something I read every morning. I have several, kind of, I guess, call them affirmations. I don't know, but they're more statements of truth that I repeat to myself. And one of the things is that good things come when I keep moving forward by faith. Right. And that is the key. I think of the story of Moses and the Red Sea, and God's instructions to him and standing on the Red Sea. The Egyptians are behind him, the sea's in front of him. And God's instructions were, first, stand still, stop moving. And at the same time, keep moving forward. Right. So be still, stand still, and move forward at the same time. And I think what happens is, I think what God was telling him was, first, stop trying to do everything on your own, and then trust me and keep moving forward. And as you move forward, you begin to see other things that you didn't realize were there in the first place, right? And so opportunities open up that you never even realized.
That's so good. I think about Joshua with that too. It wasn't as they were standing at the Jordan at flood stage.
Yeah.
And the command goes to go forward.
Right.
And Joshua,
step in the water, right?
They have to step in the water first before the water parts. The water does not part first.
Right.
They have to step in it. Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think there's a word for that. Faith, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So tell me about StoryBuilder.
Sure.
What do you do, and how does this help aspiring leaders, influencers?
Sure. Well, I mean, what we do is in the name. We build stories, right? We like to say that we tell stories that make the world a better place. Yeah. And we like to come alongside people who have ideas, they have a message that they're trying to get out and share with the world, and then help them, first of all, elevate that message, right? Come alongside and add value to their ideas and say, well, have you thought about this? Or what if we said it like this? And what if we added this other dimension to it? We could add so much depth. I literally just came in from a lunch meeting with a gentleman who's in that place where he's had a super successful corporate career, and now he's entering a season where he's trying to do more business consulting and leadership and mentoring and so forth. And he's got all these ideas and he's put them together, but he needs someone who can trust to come alongside and now next level, right? Let's make sure they're really awesome and then help bring them to life. So that's what we do. We create compelling books, first of all, so all things books related, from writing the books with someone to coaching them through while they write it, to publishing, getting it up into print, finding the right publishing path, figuring all that out. And then also creating engaging learning experiences. So in addition to the book, maybe there's a digital course that someone's wanting to create, or a workshop or a training. I think I mentioned John Maxwell. Like, we do all of John Maxwell's, with Maxwell Leadership, we've created most of their content for the last 10 years and helping them. Essentially, how do you monetize those ideas and turn them into things that you can then charge more for, right? So a book, you might charge paperback $15, $20, hardback $25, $30. But the book is really just an entry point into other ways that you can monetize and serve more people. And that's why I think it's important we think of monetize as just a way of measuring how many people are we serving, right? How much value are we adding to other people? So that's a lot of what we do. Books and learning experiences, focusing on storytelling, and helping people figure out, what is my story? What is my message? How do I communicate that well?
Why do you think story is so important? Like, that's a theme that runs through everything you've said so far.
Oh, sure.
Why do you think that's so important, and particularly for leaders? Well,
I'm going to answer that on two different levels. Let me start with, to me, the most important level. That's my faith level. I think there's an ultimate storyteller, and we're all part of that story, and that's unfolding, and he's telling this story in time and space. And so our very existence occurs within the context of story. You know, there's a verse in the New Testament that talks about in Jesus we live and move and have our being, right? It's a story. So I see us as like J.R.R. Tolkien said, you know, we're, to paraphrase, we're sub storytellers, right? And so we get to tell stories within his story. So that kind of my motivation. But as I often say, you don't have to share the details of my faith to enjoy the benefits of my beliefs, right? And so when we do that, for leaders to understand that people are wired for story. I mean, we've been telling story. This is from oral traditions were initially passed down to stories being passed. The history of humanity is the history of stories, and we love them and they resonate with us. So as a leader, if I'm not getting clear on my story and the message that I'm trying to share with the world, people have a hard time following it. It doesn't connect. It doesn't resonate. If the people I'm leading also, if I'm not factoring in, am I telling the story of where we're going well? Am I casting the vision in that way? Am I presenting it in a way that aligns with what we expect from stories? Then I'm leaving a whole lot of value on the table that I'm just not connecting with. And often we feel like we just don't connect with a leader or some vision that they're sharing. We may not even understand why. But I think a lot of it is because, and I have this challenge as well, because I tend to be more analytical. So I just want to let's go right to the numbers, right to the details. Let's just get it done. But people crave story, right? And so if you take that same content and put a story around it and bring it to life. I mean, pastors know this, right? That's what they do all the time, is try to bring it to life with story. Jesus knew this. Let's tell a parable. That'll be stickier, right? But I think that's a lot of what leaders, where the value of story comes in for leaders, is that, and it becomes unique to them, right? People remember where they heard the story and who they heard it from.
What happens if a leader doesn't do that? What happens if they're not proactive about sharing and even shaping the story?
Great question. I think what happens is, first of all, they don't resonate. Right? People don't connect with their vision. They don't connect with it. And even though they may not fully understand why, it's almost as if you can only go so deep, and then you can't the roots can't go any deeper because there's no rich story to tap into. Think of the story of the United States, for example. You know, everybody who knows the founding stories and so forth. It's like, imagine if those weren't there. Right. The roots of our nation and our attachment to it would only go so deep, right? And they'd be more shallow in that regard. So you get a shallower impact with the people you lead, right? And so you don't have as much loyalty. And I think it begins to affect things like retention. People don't stay with the organization because they just don't feel connected as deeply when the story isn't as powerful. Great example. I was just in Chick-fil-A the other day, right? And their story's on the wall, right? And it's everywhere. You know what their story is. And because of that, they actually have a lot of not only brand loyalty, but people loyalty. You know, I was just talking to someone recently who they've been there 20 plus years, 25 years, right? And they love the culture, right? And the culture comes out of that story. So I think when you don't tell the story well, you lose those things. And all of that then impacts the bottom line. All of that directly drives, in a business standpoint, how much money are we making? Well, how are we connecting with people? How are we building those relationships in a church or ministry setting? It's are we able to get the results that we want to get? And if not, why not? And I do think a lot of times that is what happens, is we're not clear on our story. So there's friction in the telling of it, there's disconnect, and we never really know quite why, because in our minds it makes sense, but we're not thinking of it in terms of the person hearing or seeing the story and how that's unfolding.
You know, I love that you brought up retention, because I think often when a leader is thinking about, you know, how to strategically lead a team or an organization or a business or a church or nonprofit or whatever they're leading, you know, we do think about having the right people around us. We do think about making sure we have the right people there, and keeping the right people is a big deal. We know retention is super important to the bottom line. And in an era in time these days where retention is a significant challenge, I love how you're describing story as a proactive tool that leaders can use to affect that in a positive way. Is it just retention, or are there other things that story can help with when it comes to leading a team? Does it affect alignment at all?
Well, the first thing, maybe, yes. The first thing that comes to mind is what I see right behind you on the shelf is you have a hat that says culture on it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big things that it drives, right? Because culture trumps everything.
Yes.
And so at StoryBuilders, that's always been a big thing for us is culture, culture, culture.
Yes.
Does our culture, and then does our culture align with our values, right? So our core values, living that out.
That's good.
So I think that's probably where a lot of that alignment takes place. If the stories that we tell, and let me just give you an example of this. So I think in our own team, I often find myself doing this where there'll be a situation and there's a decision to be made. And we often say, well, what do our values tell us? But those values are our decision-making filters, right? That's how we make those decisions. We run it through our values. And I will often say, well, imagine if, or some scenario of what would that look like if, and it's interesting how when we run these different stories, we're able to better process the values in the context of stories. Right? There's a reason as little kids we get told stories like fables and fairy tales and all this kind of stuff. The like Aesop's fables, right? Back in the day, like what was it? The fox trying to get the grapes and all those kind of things, right? And they stick with you because the stories bring a value to life. Yeah. So that's where I think the alignment takes place. And then that does affect retention because I think actually stories bring tremendous clarity to values. And this is one of the things we try to do in books is tell some powerful stories to illustrate the examples. One of the first pieces of our storytelling structure that we use, we call it attention. How are you going to get someone's attention? And what we try to do is come up with signature stories that really bring that principle to life and illustrate it in a powerful way. That then the light bulb comes on the reader's head and they see, why is that important? Why does that make? So it's not just telling someone something, it's showing them using words to create that story. So I think stories do create that alignment, and the alignment then creates that stickiness, and the stickiness creates that culture that every leader needs to be trying to intentionally build.
You make such a compelling case for this. And I can imagine that there are listeners who are hearing this and thinking, that's great, but I have never done that. I've got a team and I've never really leveraged the power of story.
Sure.
Where do I start?
Yeah.
How would you respond to a question like that?
Yeah. I think that's the first step, first of all, is being aware of it, right? So having an awareness of, and I don't do this all the time, right? And I live this stuff every day. I don't always run every decision through, all right, what kind of story can I tell about that? And there are some things that don't require a story, right? They're more administrative and so forth. But always, first of all, thinking, what's the story? What story am I telling? Because we are always telling a story. Everything we do tells a story. But the question is, what story is it telling, right? So we're either accidentally telling it or intentionally telling it. And then I would say, identify a place where it's like, all right, maybe there's a decision to be made or a problem has surfaced. Actually, problems are a great place. Find a problem and figure out, all right, how do I want to frame this? Because leaders are charged with defining reality for their team. What that means is that leaders at the core are storytellers. They're telling the story to their team. This is the story, guys, that we're in right now. And let's see the story in this way. Once you do that, we have a 5-part storytelling structure that we use. We use it for all of our content. It's a guideline. It's a framework that we use consistently. And if it's all right, I can just talk through those 5 steps.
Please.
And because it gives a good framework for people to kind of, all right, this is my problem I'm having. Let me think through these 5 things. So first of all, it begins with attention. So that is about, all right, the people I'm telling the story to, how do I get their attention? What is it that they want at the end of the day? Where are they coming from? What is it that they're wanting? Secondly, tension. So attention and then tension. So tension is all about what's the problem? Why aren't they getting what they want? Why are they struggling in this situation? If this is what they want, let's just make this up. I want to be in a workplace where I feel connected and all that kind of and stress-free, All right, well, why aren't they getting that. What are the problems? Well, this system's breaking down, it seems, and it's creating this conflict, and that creates this fear inside of me. And I don't even know if we're good enough. Can we pull this together? I don't know. Often we run from tension as leaders, but as leaders, we need to lean into that tension, because that's where the growth can take place. So attention, tension, and then connection. So connection is all about connecting in an organization, or at the leader personally connecting with the people, or connecting with the organization's vision. Right. So as a leader, first of all, I need to illustrate that I understand that tension. I've been there. I've done that. I've seen this before, guys. I felt that what you're feeling, I understand it, right? So empathizing, but also, I've overcome it in this way, or I've seen it handled this way with great results. And so these are the credentials that I have to help lead in this setting. With that, often can come some vulnerability for a leader, right? So being able to say, I have seen it and I have failed. I've fallen short. My story wasn't a great one. Here's why. And from that, I've learned this. And there can be tremendous strength in that. So attention, tension, connection, and then solution. So solution is really, here's the essence of the message I want to say to you guys, right? Here's the heart of it. If we do this, it will help us solve this problem. And here's why. But notice we don't begin with solution. A lot of leaders do that. A lot of leaders simply show up and here's a solution, everybody. Have a nice day. Here's the memo. Let's run with it. Without setting that up properly, without giving thought to what do they want, without giving thought to what are the barriers, what are the problems, without giving thought to, am I being vulnerable? Am I connecting with the people in this way? And then presenting that solution in a powerful way. And then finally, action. What action do we want to take based on that solution, right? So maybe it's, we're going to create this system, or we're going to reach out to this person, or it could be a list of different actions that we're taking in response to the whole situation. But that 5-step process is good, not just for leaders in communicating, but we use it all the content we create as a guideline or a starting point to just break it down so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. The storytelling process, it just breaks it down, makes it feel more achievable and familiar.
Bill, that is so helpful. I so appreciate you sharing that, because that's exactly right. It makes it more accessible. Like, okay, I could do that.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I could step into that. I may not feel like a natural storyteller, but I could do that.
Yeah. One of the gentlemen we work with, Chris Fuller, with Right Path Resources, he calls it componentizing. Right?
Yeah.
You just break it down to small enough components and you can do it.
Yes.
Right?
I love that.
Everything's doable. From writing a huge book, we just break it down to the smallest components, right?
Yeah.
Don't try to write it all in one sitting. Just take one, write that, take one, write that. And before you know it, you've got an entire manuscript draft on your hands.
So good. Bill, I want to talk about you for just a second.
Sure.
You are leading at a different level than you led at 5 years ago. Your team needs you to lead at a different level today. And 5 years from now, that's going to be true again. How do you stay on top of your game? How do you level up as a leader with the new skills that you are going to need and that your team and business are going to need you to have?
Yeah. Great question. And I hope and pray every day that I'm doing that, right?
Yeah.
And as I think every leader, and I think that's probably the first key, though, is that I have found in my life, I have to stay teachable, right? So what worked yesterday isn't going to work today necessarily, right? I can learn from it, but I can't just rinse and repeat. And those leaders that get into that, they just rinse and repeat, eventually they begin to decline. Their organization begins to decline. But you have to always be reinventing yourself. My friend Chris, once again, he says for every 30% of growth in an organization, you have to reinvent your systems, right? So every 30%. So if you're growing quickly, so you're hitting 60%, you just jumped over a level, right? So it requires that you have to keep moving forward in order if you're gonna do that. So I think first of all, it begins with humility, recognizing that I don't know everything. There's a lot I don't know, and I have a concern with myself, and I think any leader that's had any level of success should have the concern that it's so easy to get comfortable. and to settle into the status quo. Another book I'll recommend that we wrote with a gentleman, Greg Cagle, called The 4 Dimensions of Culture. He does a phenomenal job of unpacking this, and he talks about that status quo as the complacent dimension of culture. And that complacent dimension is always with us, and it's our default setting. If we don't intentionally push in a different direction, we'll slip right back into it. And so as a leader, our main job is to keep moving forward in the positive dimensions in order to avoid the negative dimensions, because if we don't, it will inevitably happen. Right. And so I think that's the case too, of constantly learning, constantly growing, maintaining vigilance on that, and continually casting and recasting the vision. One of the challenges that I have, frankly, is, I don't want to be a micromanager, and yet culture is in the details. Right. And so as a leader, we have to kind of balance that. And that, to me, it's a storytelling thing too, because, for instance, you read Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens tells stories in such a detailed way. He'll spend 3 pages describing the leg of a table or something. But other writers, I think some of the more contemporary British writers, for example, are much more poetic and short and concise. And John Maxwell writes entirely different. The writing styles can be different. And as leaders, our storytelling styles can be different. But in all of that, so balancing details, big picture, details, big picture, it's like we're constantly, as my friend John Foley describes it, like kissing the envelope. He was a former Blue Angel lead solo pilot, right? So fighter pilot, you take it to the max and then you pull back. You take it to the max, and you pull. It's that kind of pushing the boundaries and growing, and then pulling back and saying, all right, what happened? How was that? Where do I need to push next? Let's push, pull back, reassess. And I think that's the way to keep moving forward and growing in whatever area we're in. But that's a little bit of what I try to do. Maybe not always successfully, but what I try to do as a leader to keep that keep it in a place where I'm not settling into the leader I used to be or who I am, but what's next? Who do I need to become? And being willing to let go of what was before to do that. In fact, I'm in the middle of this right now. Redefining my role and resetting my role over the next several weeks. As we've grown, I see, all right, I need to do that. I need to change some things. And so what do I need to let go of? What do I need to lean into?
I love that teachable spirit and the humility that you approach that, and really everything we've talked about. You're coming from that place, and you're starting from a place of saying, I don't know all the answers. I'm not the answer man, so to speak, right? What can I learn here? What can I learn? How can I position myself in such a way that I'm going to be, instead of being an obstacle to growth, I'm going to be a facilitator of it. I think that's so healthy.
Well, and you can, my team has heard me say this many times, is that, the greatest barrier to our growth is me.
Yes.
Right? And so if I'm not changing, growing, and morphing, then I become a lid on the entire team. So I have to let that go.
So good. You've mentioned several already, but I always ask the leaders that I talk to this: is there a book that you would recommend that every leader listening, man, if they haven't read this, they should put this on their to read list?
Well, I certainly would recommend the one I just mentioned, 4 Dimensions of Culture by Greg Cagle. It's a phenomenal book. Man, I go, there's so many. Oh my goodness. Not all of them that I've been involved with and written necessarily. Have been blessed to have been involved in hundreds of books and book creations, and some of them are just exceptionally good. Books that have really shaped me, I'm going to go back a few years here to Stephen Covey's book, First Things First.
Yes.
I've read that at least 3 to 4 or 5 times. I lost track. Those kind of books, really good. Some of John Maxwell's are really good. And actually with John's, some of the ones that don't get a lot of the fanfare actually are some of the best ones in my mind. His book about thinking, and I can't believe the name has escaped me right now. Thinking for a Change is what it's called. Phenomenal book. Just a phenomenal book. Today Matters is another one that's really good, super practical. Those would be some of the top ones I would recommend. There's probably many, many, many more, but if you just asked for one, I just gave you 3, so or 4. So
that's because you over deliver.
That's how it works.
That's what great leaders do.
You start talking books with me, and you'll get a bunch of them in a hurry. So You know what? Let me just pull this one out right here. It's sitting on my desk. This is I say this for a reason. This is a book by Glenn Cunningham called Never Quit. Incredible story about Glenn Cunningham. I would never have known it if not for this book. And I don't know where I got this, at a library or book sale, or probably picked it up for $0.25 somewhere. I don't know. But Glenn Cunningham is the guy who broke the 4-minute mile barrier.
Oh,
he was
wow.
the first to do it unofficially. He did it. And then somebody else became the official person, but he was like the first. The incredible thing about his story, though, is as a young boy, he and his brother went to school one day, and somebody had mistakenly switched the kerosene for gasoline. And they went to light the fire, and the whole building just burst into flames. And so, unfortunately, his brother's life was lost. And he, the doctors didn't think he would make it either. They said he'd never walk again, all these kind of things. And yet, over the years, he simply refused to quit and kept going with it, and just came to the point where he was just running everywhere, and eventually became one of the fastest men in the world. It's an incredible story. It really is. But I never would have known it if somebody hadn't put it in a book. And to me, that is the power of books. Like when we put our story and our message in a book, it can go places we will never be. I mean, Glenn is passed now for many years, and yet his story is still inspiring to me, and I tell it often and inspires other people, all because it was in a book. So so there's a book I'd recommend. It's going to be hard to find.
I want to check it out now. That sounds absolutely fantastic. I love that. I've never read that.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to finding it somewhere.
and one of the best things was not just that, but Glenn went on to found a ranch for young boys who were in troubled settings and families and pasts, and tens of thousands of guys went through his ranch over the years and had their lives transformed because of that. So it's
so amazing.
A huge impact.
I love it. Bill, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I could talk to you for another hour.
No.
It's just so interesting to hear your perspective, given what you have come through so far. I believe there's no such thing as a wasted experience. Everything informs who we are today, that we have been through or encountered or experienced, and it's never wasted. If people walk away from an episode or a conversation like this with one big idea, and you got to decide what that one big idea would be, what would you want it to be?
I would want it to be a passion, a stirring up within someone of the desire to live a story worth telling. To live in such a way that your story is one that, like Glenn Cunningham, that people want to tell and want to share. Not that you want to be burned in a fire, right? But those painful things in your life that you didn't ask for, then become the fuel for you to really live out a life in a way that people talk about, that makes an impact. So I would say that is the question of, are you living a story that's worth telling, right? And to think, who's going to tell it, and when and where will they tell it, and how will it be told? Because what I have found is that so many people undervalue their own story. And by story, I mean what has happened to them and their response to it and their ideas around it and their message, all of that. So many people just don't value that. And so because they know it, they're used to it. It's normal to them. Just like with our strengths, we generally don't see our strengths because they feel normal to us. Me reading cereal boxes when I was a kid, right? Doesn't everybody do that? No, actually not, right? And so understanding the value of our own story, even my stepping out from the school and stepping out into this entrepreneurial path. So many people have reached out and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do I do with this? Right? How do I go about it? You've been there, done that. How do I not do it?" Right?
Yeah.
And so having that sense of the value of your own story, appreciating the value of your story, and then having the faith to lean into that and say, all right, what am I going to do with that? And how do I want to live it out today and every day in a way that will make it a story worth telling? I think that's the thing that I would want people to walk away from, because when you do that, it's transformative. It changes how you approach everything.
Well said. I know our listeners are going to want to stay connected to you, Bill, and continue to learn from you. What is the best way for them to do that?
I'd say a couple ways. First of all, any social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, anything like that, just look up StoryBuilders. You'll find us. You can also visit our website, mystorybuilders.com, and check out our website. If you think hey, I think I've got a book idea. Somebody said I should write a book, and I've been kicking it around and talking to people. We would love to come alongside and help you figure that out, whether it's working with us or pointing you in a different direction, whatever that might be. We're about telling stories that make the world a better place. And if that's us, wonderful. If not, we want to get out of the way and let people, live and tell their stories. But we do offer a free book idea session that you're welcome to book with one of our senior story strategists, where we'll walk through and hear your ideas and be candid with you. If we think it has merit, we'll tell you that. If not, we'll point you where to work on it and how to develop it and where to go from there. But you simply go to mystorybuilders.com/story and just book a time. You can just pick a time that works for you. And again, no obligation. We're just here to help and come alongside. Books, learning experiences, any of that stuff. If you're just saying, hey, I've got this idea and I've kind of done this and I've kind of done that, or I've done a lot of this and a lot of that. But let's talk. Let's see if we can be of help to you. That's mystorybuilders.com/story. And if we can help you do that, we'd love to do that.
Bill, thank you for your generosity today, for your time, for the open-handedness you've displayed in sharing so much of what you've learned so far.
Well, you're more than welcome, and I appreciate the opportunity. I love the idea of catalytic leadership. I think stories are catalysts, right? And so I love what you're doing, and I love what you're doing in the group coaching space, by the way, also. I've seen you doing some things in that space as well, and you've got a lot of great things going on. So hopefully even our conversation moves people to connect with you and take advantage of all the value that you're bringing to the table too.
Greatly appreciate that. Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.